Today, we're talking about the best settings in Warzone Season 4. Times have changed a little bit on Warzone since the last major settings video I did, so here we go. So we're starting with our button layout. And as you can see here, I do have stick and move on, which I've had on since basically the Jetpack Call of Duty games. In case you didn't know, this basically makes the right analog stick when pressed in the jump button, which for me makes it a lot easier because I like to jump shot a lot. But for most people, and maybe myself, I would really like to try out Bumper Jumper Tactical. For me, this is without a doubt the best button layout if you don't have a scuff controller or a paddled controller. Now, unfortunately, it does take quite a bit of getting used to, which is why I still haven't ended up using it as my main button layout. So why is it so good? Well, Tactical, as you may know, uses the right analog stick when it's pressed in as crouch or prone, meaning you can drop shot much easier. Then essentially the bumper jumper part of the layout essentially means, as you can probably guess, that you jump with your bumpers. So altogether, that means you can have all the range of movements from sliding, going prone and then jumping, all with a normal controller. If you do try this out and you just can't quite get used to it, then normal tactical button layout, wherever it is, normal tactical will do just fine. I just hope that there's none of you out there running default. Then some of the others here are very much your subjective choice, such as invert vertical look. But then we've got Dead Zone. Dead Zone you want as low as you can go without getting stick drift. So if you do have stick drift right now, and by stick drift I mean when you're not touching your controller, but you see your aim kind of drifting up the screen, well, if you do have that, you don't necessarily need to buy a new controller or anything, you can just pump up your Dead Zone. And Dead Zone, by the way, refers to how much you actually have to touch your analog before there's a response on the screen. So it can be great if you do have stick drift, but if you don't, you want it as low as possible so you have the most reactive game as possible. So my suggestion would be to go all the way to 0 and then see if you have stick drift. If you do, put it up a little bit and then keep doing that until you're on as low as possible. The maximum input here doesn't really matter too much. And then we're on to stick sensitivity. Now this one is a little tricky because if you are a controller player, you can be playing on PC on different FOVs, which means your sensitivity kind of is impacted by that. And on top of that, your stick sensitivity is kind of a subjective choice anyway. But for me, who still plays on console, by the way, on an Xbox Series X, just in the corner over there, I'm obviously on 80 FOV, and I run 6.6 for my stick sensitivities. Now, for some of you, that is going to be very low. I know some people who drop by the channel play on like 20, and somehow they can still hit their shots. And generally, my advice for everyone, without giving a specific number, is to run as high as you can go on these stick sensitivities, whilst you're still being able to hit your shots. Basically, the higher stick sensitivity you are, you can spin around that little bit quicker, and on average, you're gonna win more gunfights. But of course, if you try and bump it up too much, it's actually very difficult to try and center in on your target. My advice usually is that if you're an SMG player, or maybe you want to get up in people's faces a lot more, you want to have your sensitivity much higher. Then for some of the more OG players, maybe back from COD 4, who like to play that assault rifle or LMG role, which is much slower and maybe at the back, you can put your stick sensitivity on much lower and control your aim to be almost perfect. Now we're on to ADS sensitivity multiplier. Now this is actually one of the best settings which people don't realize. So this is the sensitivity when you're actually aiming down the sights. So say you do have 20 on your normal stick sensitivity, you can put this ADS sensitivity way down, and then when you aim in, it's like you're on 2 sensitivity. So in theory, you can have the insane cracked out movement, but still have an aim that can zero in on your target. I actually recommend that for everyone, no matter what your sensitivity is on, to put this down to say 0.8. You'll find that you're hitting way more shots than usual. Of course, for some people, it's going to be a little bit different, but generally, anything below 0.9 and around 0.8 I find fantastic. And now you can actually customize your ADS sensitivity per zoom. And for a while I was doing this, but then I just ended up running 0.8 for everything because I found it as great. For aim response curve type, I recommend running either dynamic or linear. So with dynamic, it's usually referred to as the more snappier aim response curve. And this is because when you move your analog in the first phase on the screen, you're going to see a quicker response and movement before it levels off. Whereas linear is kind of what you expect the standard setting to be on. So that refers to how much you put in your analog, you have a direct response on the screen. Linear is actually way better for the more general player who plays all sorts of different roles. But if you are changing up your aim response curve type based on this video, remember it does take a little bit of getting used to. Controller vibration, I just switched that off, but it is subjective. For aim assist, I've been messing around with this for years, and I do have a bunch of videos on all these settings in depth, which I'll put down in the description if you want to know more detail on each one. But for aim assist currently, I'm actually back on standard, and that's just because I find myself in all kinds of different situations because I play all kinds of different roles. But actually, when I did some testing on Modern Warfare and on Vanguard, I found that focusing was particularly insane and kind of felt like a cheat. But because the aim assist was so strong, I actually found it was difficult to shoot multiple targets because I'd kind of get stuck on one. So I would say for most players, leave it on standard. But if you are struggling with your aim, or if you're playing solos, focusing is actually a fantastic aim assist setting. I'm just gonna fly through some of these because I don't want to keep you here all day. We've got use and reload behavior. Contextual tap is absolutely the only setting you should be running. This means instead of holding onto a button to pick up a weapon, you simply just have to click the button. It makes looting just insanely quicker. And as we go through a couple more here, I've just got to recommend armor plate behavior as apply all. It simply means when you press the button to put your armor on, you don't have to keep pressing it for each plate, and it just saves you a couple of extra clicks. For slide behavior, we want tap, as it makes slide cancelling way more intuitive. Some of these are going to be more obvious to you since we are in the third year of Warzone now. But if you are a complete beginner, I've got to just mention some of these. Then for automatic sprint, I've got mine on automatic tactical sprint. Essentially meaning when I press forward on the analog and go to move, I automatically go into tactical sprint, which makes my movement way better. If you start getting shot, you just simply press forward on the analog and you're out of there. Then finally, for the controller general settings, I've got parachute auto deploy on disabled. By controlling the redeploy yourself, you can land much closer to the ground. Again, this saves a few extra seconds with looting and maybe saves your life at the start of the game. Now on to graphics. Of course, on console, we don't have a lot to play with, but there are certain settings we can tweak to make our visuals that little bit better. And that starts with camera movements. Put this on least on 50%. You're going to be able to see much easier, albeit without as much realism. And it's the exact same story for world motion blur and weapon motion blur and film grain. Put these on disabled and 0 as low as they can go. It just allows you to pick up visual cues maybe a few milliseconds quicker, which can be, again, the difference between life and death. For gore effects, that's completely up to you. For brightness, I run mine on 51, which I know sounds oddly specific, but these days we don't need our brightness anywhere near as high as we used to on Verdansk. Thankfully on Caldera, Rebirth Island, and Fortune's Keep, it's bright enough to actually see. 51 I find is a nice balance, along with my other settings. Then for on-demand texture streaming, I've got mine on high quality because I do have a decent connection and it's actually a wired connection. If you're ever struggling with your connection and you've got it on high quality, I recommend just putting this down a little bit. You can tell the difference on screen with the quality, but it's not huge and it's not worth lagging around. Then as we go on to interface, I've got my subtitles on enabled. This is a great way to pick up intel on enemies. For example, an enemy will say something when they do something on the map, so maybe they shoot someone, maybe they're reloading, or maybe they're healing up, and then when they actually say something, it will come up in your subtitles if they're close enough. Then for colorblind type, I currently run Deuteranopia, which is without a doubt the best way to see the maps right now in Warzone. If you run it on the standard setting without any colorblind type overlay, then sadly the map does look a little drab. And then with the other settings, they're either too green or way too orange. I find Deuteranopia is a nice middle ground. For minimap shape, of course, we've got it on square, where you just can see way more than the circle. Then for the rest of the settings on the bottom of this page, they're not too important, so you can decide what you run on them. But I will say I do have my closed buy station on purchase setting on enabled, and this is because if I'm running onto a buy station to revive someone, I want to be in and out as fast as possible to not get shot. Okay, now lastly, we're on to audio settings. I know audio is one of the big problems in Warzone, which a lot of people go on about.
Like, where's your fucking audio, you know? Where the fuck is your audio?
And recently they did say that there was updates surrounding it, which I went over in a previous video. But if you don't want to go over all the different options and how they might fit best to you, I simply recommend either boost low or midnight mode. These are the best settings to hear footsteps, and for midnight mode are the best settings to still hear footsteps, but also hear all the other game sounds as well. For master volume, it's kind of up to you. I have mine on 100 because I control it with my headset. For music, I put it straight to 0 because I want to hear what's going on in the game. same. Dialogue, I've got it on 40 for a similar reason to the subtitles earlier. I want to hear enemies shouting out. Effects, I've got on 100 because that is things like footsteps. Cinematics doesn't matter because that's just for campaign. And then again, some of these are subjective and they're not that important. If you ever want a little bit of fun, I do recommend putting your voice chat on classic chatter, which makes you sound like a World War II officer, but generally just put this on no effect. Then for everything else, you can leave it on the standard setting or just tweak it to how you want it. They're not massively important. So they were the best settings for Warzone in Season 4, and if you want to rank up the Battle Pass as fast as possible in Season 4 as well, make sure you check this video out. See ya!